Welcome to the deep dive. Let's start with a bit of a thought experiment today.
Okay, I'm listening.
I want you to imagine a tool, the most powerful tool we have ever invented.
Mm-hmm.
And it was designed specifically to question reality, to poke at it, to test it, and demand evidence.
Right.
But then ask yourself, what happens if that tool quietly stops questioning its own foundation?
You're talking about science.
I am. And more specifically, I'm wondering about that moment when a repeated idea, something that gets taught in every textbook, stops being just a description of reality and actually begins to shape how we see reality.
That is the core tension we are stepping into in this deep dive. We're looking at The Science Delusion by Rupert Sheldrake.
And right off the bat, I have to address that title, The Science Delusion. It really sounds like an anti-science manifesto.
It absolutely sounds like one. But it really isn't. It is not an attack on the scientific method itself. It is an examination of a specific scientific worldview.
Which is a crucial distinction.
Very much so. Rupert Sheldrake isn't some outsider throwing stones at the establishment. He's a Cambridge-trained biologist. He was a research fellow of the Royal Society. He spent years in labs working on plant hormones. He knows the method inside and out.
So he's coming from inside the house, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And his argument is that science as a method of inquiry, which is inherently open-ended and curious, has become heavily entangled with a philosophy called materialism.
Right.
And over the last few centuries, that philosophy has hardened into a set of assumptions. Assumptions that most of us, honestly, don't even realize are assumptions anymore.
It's like the air we breathe. We just don't notice it until someone points it out.
Right. Scientific knowledge rests on layers. You have your observations, then you interpret those observations, and beneath all of that are these invisible assumptions. Over time, they fade into the background. They start to feel completely self-evident.
Sheldrake calls this the fantasy of omniscience.
Yes. It's this quiet underlying belief that, in principle, we already know the big answers. Reality is purely material, is mechanical, and consciousness is just a byproduct.
So the only thing left to do is just fill in the details, calculate the decimal points.
Pretty much. And anything that doesn't fit that neat little model is quietly excluded or treated as a weird anomaly. Sheldrake points out several of these deeply embedded dogmas. And one that really stands out, one that really shapes how we view ourselves, is this idea that nature is fundamentally mechanical.
That everything is a machine, which is a metaphor that has essentially eaten the world.
It really has. But it wasn't always that way. If you look back to the Middle Ages or even the Renaissance, the prevailing view was that the Earth was a living organism.
Mother Earth.
The universe was alive. But then you get to the 17th century, and figures like Kepler and Galileo are trying to figure out how the cosmos works. They needed a model to explain the regularity of the planets.
And the most advanced technology they had at the time was the clock?
The clock, it was an incredibly persuasive analogy. Clocks are self-contained, they are orderly, they are completely predictable. So they projected that machinery onto the stars.
Which makes sense for planets. But then René Descartes takes it a massive step further.
He did. He said it's not just the stars, it's life itself. He literally viewed animals as automata.
Just distinct mechanisms.
Right. The implication of a machine metaphor is profound. Because a machine has no internal goals of its own, a car doesn't want to go to the grocery store. You drive it there.
Right, it's designed from the outside.
So if nature is just a machine, then nature has no goals. There's no inherent purpose.
But here is where it feels like the cracks start to show. Because if I listen to biologists talk, they use goal-oriented language all the time.
They can't help it.
They really can't. They talk about the immune system attacking a virus to save the host. Or you have Richard Dawkins talking about selfish genes.
Yes, selfish genes. A gene is a chemical structure. A chemical structure cannot be selfish. Selfish implies a motive. It implies a desire to survive. Sheldrake argues that even the most hardcore materialists end up using these vitalist metaphors because living things actually are fundamentally different from machines. Organisms are self-organizing.
Right. If you get a flat tire, your car doesn't just grow a new tire. But if you cut your finger, you heal.
So what does the machine metaphor quietly exclude? It excludes the holistic coordination of the organism. It forces us to treat living systems like robots, even when our own observations and our own language suggest otherwise.
It's the framework dictating what we are allowed to see. And that mechanical view bleeds directly into another massive assumption we make about the universe, The rules it runs on.
Yes, the assumption that the laws of nature are fixed.
This is a standard view in physics,
Yeah.
right? That at the exact moment of the Big Bang, all the laws and the physical constants like the speed of light or gravity were just set in stone.
That's the assumption. They haven't changed since the beginning of time, and they never will change. It's a very comforting idea.
It is comforting. I like knowing gravity is going to work the same way tomorrow.
We all do. But Sheldrake asks a very grounded, slightly subversive question here. Why do we even call them laws?
I just always assumed it was a standard figure of speech.
It is, but it's a metaphor drawn from human empires. It implies a lawgiver, a cosmic emperor who decreed how things should behave. But the materialist worldview got rid of the lawgiver. So now you just have these free-floating laws, and you have to wonder, how does a hydrogen atom know to obey the law of gravity? Is there a tiny little rule book it consults?
So if they aren't fixed laws imposed from the outside, what is the alternative?
Sheldrake draws on the American philosopher C.S. Peirce and suggests we might want to think of them as habits.
Habits of nature.
Think about it. We know the universe is evolving. So in an evolving universe, why wouldn't the regularities within it evolve too? What if gravity isn't a fixed mathematical law, but a habit that matter has simply settled into over billions of years?
That's an elegant idea philosophically. Actually, any empirical reason to think these laws or constants wobble?
This is where we get to the data, which is fascinating. Sheldrake points to the measurements of big G.
The universal gravitational constant.
Right, the number that defines the strength of gravity. This is supposed to be one of the most immutable things in physics. But if you look at the records from metrologists, the scientists whose entire job is to measure these constants with extreme precision, the values of G fluctuated.
Why, how much?
Between 1973 and 2010, the values measured by different labs varied by about 1.1%.
Okay, 1.1% sounds tiny to an everyday person. If my coffee's a 1.1% hotter, I'm not going to notice.
In high-precision physics, 1.1% is a massive margin. It's an enormous discrepancy.
So how does the scientific community explain that variation?
They don't really explain it. They handle it by relying on the dogma. The assumption is that the constant must be constant. Therefore, any variation must be an error in measurement.
Even across different labs?
Even across different labs.
Oh.
So what the metrologists do is they average the results out, they treat the deviations as errors, and they publish a new, smoothed-out best value.
So they're essentially just averaging out the anomaly. Because the framework says the laws cannot change, any evidence that they might be changing is quietly smoothed over.
Which really makes you wonder what we're missing. Because if gravity actually does fluctuate based on our position in the galaxy or some other environmental factor, we would never know. Our assumptions would literally blind us to the data.
Precisely. The framework shapes the reality we perceive.
And that leads us to what is probably the most controversial dogma.
The idea that consciousness is confined to the brain.
This is the strictly materialist view. That your mind, your subjective experience, is nothing but the physical, electrochemical activity of your brain cells.
But that runs right into the hard problem of consciousness.
It does. We can map brain activity perfectly. We can say this part lights up when you see red. But that doesn't explain the actual feeling, the subjective experience of seeing red.
And materialism's answer to that gap is usually just, well, we will figure it out eventually.
Yes, what philosopher Karl Popper called promissory materialism, the promise that a mechanical explanation is coming someday. But Sheldrake challenges this with the extended mind theory.
Right, the idea that when I look at the sky, I am experiencing the sky out there, not just looking at a tiny internal representation of the sky inside my skull.
Standard biology says vision is purely passive. Light comes in, your brain reconstructs a model. Sheldrake suggests it is a two-way process. Light comes in, but your perception actually extends outward to touch the things you're looking at.
And he uses gaze detection experiments to back this up, right? That everyday feeling of being stared at.
Yes, everyone has felt that. You turn around and someone is looking at you. Standard biology says that is impossible, just confirmation bias. But Sheldrake actually conducted thousands of trials on this.
Where someone sits blindfolded and someone behind a window either stares at them or looks away.
And the subjects had to guess. The results consistently showed a small but statistically significant effect, well above random chance.
Which suggests the mind is interacting with the environment in ways standard biology completely rejects. Your mind touches what you look at. Okay, so we take these pieces. We have habits of nature instead of fixed laws. We have organisms instead of machines. We have minds that extend beyond the brain. How do these habits actually form and spread?
This is the core engine of Sheldrake's worldview. morphic resonance.
Right. Now, we actually explored this more fully in a previous deep dive on his other book, The Presence of the Past. But for anyone who missed that, or just as a refresher, what is the simple version of morphic resonance?
The simple version is that nature carries a kind of memory through patterns. Similar patterns of activity resonate across time and space.
So once a thing happens somewhere...
it becomes easier for that exact same thing to happen everywhere else.
Right, and he cites some really fascinating experiments to explore this, like the rat mazes.
The rat experiments are a perfect example. This started at Harvard, where researchers were teaching rats to navigate a water maze. It took the first generation of rats quite a long time to learn the escape route.
Which makes sense.
But subsequent generations learned it much faster.
Now, a skeptic would just say, that's genetics. You breed the smart rats, you get smarter babies.
And that was the assumption. But then other researchers ran the same experiment in Edinburgh and in Melbourne, with entirely separate lineages of rats. No genetic connection to the Harvard rats whatsoever.
And what happened?
They started out learning the maze significantly faster than the original Harvard rats did. The implication, according to Sheldrake, is that once the skill was learned by a critical mass of individuals, the pattern, the habit of escaping the maze, resonated in the collective field of that species. It became easier for any rat, anywhere, to tap into that habit.
It's almost like a software update for the entire species, pushed out over the air.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just animals. He talks about chemistry, too.
Yes, the crystallization of new compounds. He points to the historical difficulty of getting a newly synthesized chemical to crystallize for the very first time. Chemists will sometimes spend years trying to get a new compound to form a crystal structure.
But once it happens in one lab...
once it crystallizes in one lab, suddenly labs all over the world find it remarkably easy to crystallize that same compound.
The standard explanation for that is actually kind of funny.
The bearded chemist theory?
Yes. The idea that microscopic seed crystals are just traveling around the world on the beards and clothing of visiting scientists.
Carried from lab to lab, which is a very mechanical explanation. But Sheldrake notes that this happens even in strictly controlled, sealed environments with no cross-contamination. He suggests the first crystal establishes a morphic field. A new habit of nature is formed.
Now, we need to pause here and be extremely clear about this. Morphic resonance is highly controversial.
Very much so. Emphasizing again that it is presented as a hypothesis. A way to show that materialist theories aren't the only possible explanation for how form and behavior are inherited.
But the scientific community did not take kindly to this hypothesis at all. I mean, the editor of the journal Nature literally called it a book for burning.
The hostility was incredibly intense. But you do have to understand where that scientific pushback comes from. It's not just blind hatred.
Right. There is no detectable energy field we can measure with an instrument.
No, you can't put a meter on it. It's about protecting the scientific method. The method relies on clear boundaries. It relies on testability, on variables you can control and isolate.
Because if morphic resonance is real, isolation is basically impossible.
If the laws of nature can change, or if a rat learning a maze in London mysteriously affects a rat in Tokyo without any physical connection, the foundational stability required for robust science starts to dissolve.
It threatens the reproducibility of experiments. It blurs the line between strong science and pure speculation.
That's the tension. But Sheldrake counters this by pointing out what he calls the credibility crunch in modern materialism. He argues that mainstream physics is already speculating wildly.
Right. Dark matter and dark energy.
We are told that dark matter and dark energy make up roughly 96% of the universe.
And we have no idea what they actually are.
We have no idea. We can't detect them directly. We just posited their existence because the mechanical math of the universe doesn't work without them.
So we're basically admitting that we only understand 4% of reality.
Yes. And you have serious mainstream physicists proposing multiverses, infinite, invisible, untestable universes, just to explain why our universe's constants are fine-tuned for life.
So Sheldrake's point is, you're already invoking invisible, untestable entities.
Right. He's saying, if you are allowed to invent infinite, invisible universes to protect your mechanical framework, why is exploring the idea of memory in nature considered heresy?
It really highlights the balancing act here, because on one hand, you have the danger of too much openness. If you accept every anomalous theory, the distinction between a strong idea and a weak one dissolves.
But on the other hand, if you have too much stability, Your assumptions harden into unquestioned beliefs. You stop looking for what is actually there, and you only look for what fits the frame.
The frameworks guide our attention. They dictate what counts as a valid explanation and what gets ignored.
They are powerful, but they are not neutral.
So looking at all of this together, the book really serves as a massive case study.
A case study in how ideas challenge dominant narratives, yes. How they attempt to reshape our ways of thinking.
And the issue isn't even really whether Sheldrake's specific hypotheses, like morphic resonance, are right or wrong.
No, the real issue is whether science is free enough to even ask these kinds of questions without facing a modern-day inquisition.
Because if we can't question the foundational assumptions, we are just reinforcing a belief system.
Which brings us right back to those questions we started with.
It does. And I want to leave you, our listener, with those same questions to chew on as you go about your day.
If science is built on questioning everything, should it question its own foundations?
How do ideas shape what we are able to perceive as real?
And what kind of reality emerges once an idea is widely believed?